The laughter still echoed in my ears as I stood frozen in the doorway of my mother-in-law's dining room, my hands trembling around the empty casserole dish I'd brought for what was supposed to be a peaceful family dinner. The words that had just spilled from my sister-in-law Amanda's mouth hung in the air like poison, each syllable designed to cut deeper than the last. Well, at least now we know Sarah can't even keep a baby alive for more than 12 weeks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maybe it's nature's way of telling her she's not meant to be a mother. The collective chuckle that followed from the assembled family members felt like a physical blow to my chest, stealing the breath from my lungs and making my vision blur with unshed tears. 6 weeks had passed since I'd lost the baby. 6 weeks since the cramping had started during what should have been a routine doctor's appointment. 6 weeks since my world had shattered into pieces so small I wasn't sure they could ever be put back together again. The miscarriage at 12 weeks had been devastating enough on its own, but the way my husband David's family had responded to our loss had opened wounds I never knew could exist. What should have been a time of mourning and healing had instead become a battlefield, where my grief was treated as weakness and my pain was viewed as an inconvenience to their family gatherings. My name is Sarah Collins, though I kept my maiden name of Bennett when I married David 2 years ago, much to his family's displeasure. At 28, I thought I had my life figured out in the way that young professionals often do when everything seems to be falling into place according to plan. I worked as a senior marketing coordinator for Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized advertising firm in downtown Denver, where I'd built a reputation for creative campaigns and client relationship management that had earned me 3 promotions in 4 years. The work was demanding but fulfilling. The kind of career that made me feel like I was building something meaningful, while also providing the financial independence that my mother had always stressed, was crucial for any woman. David and I had met at a charity fundraiser for children's literacy programs, where I was representing my company's pro bono work, and he was attending as a guest of his law firm. He was charming in the way that successful attorneys often are, with sandy brown hair that he kept perfectly styled, and a smile that could disarm even the most skeptical clients. What had attracted me initially wasn't his obvious professional success or his family's prominent social standing in Denver's legal community, but rather his apparent gentleness and the way he seemed genuinely interested in my work and opinions, rather than just viewing me as a potential trophy wife. Our courtship had been traditional and romantic, filled with elegant dinners at restaurants I'd only read about in magazines, weekend getaways to mountain resorts, and the kind of thoughtful gestures that romance novels are built around. David would surprise me with tickets to concerts by artists I'd mentioned liking in passing conversations, or show up at my office with coffee from my favorite cafe when he knew I was working late on challenging campaigns. He seemed to remember every detail of our conversations, celebrating my professional victories as enthusiastically as his own, and offering genuine comfort during the inevitable setbacks that come with any demanding career. The Collins family had seemed welcoming enough during our engagement period, though I'd noticed subtle signs that should have raised red flags about their true attitudes toward outsiders. David's mother, Patricia, was a formidable woman in her early 60s who had built her identity around being the perfect political wife during her husband's successful run for county judge 20 years earlier. She maintained their sprawling suburban home with the precision of a military operation, hosted dinner parties that were featured in Denver's society pages, and spoke about family traditions with the reverence usually reserved for religious doctrine. David's father, Judge William Collins, was exactly what central casting would order for a distinguished legal patriarch. Silver-haired and imposing, he commanded respect through a combination of genuine legal expertise and the kind of old-fashioned authority that came from 3 decades on the bench. He spoke in measured tones that suggested every word had been carefully considered, and his opinions on legal matters were quoted regularly in local newspapers. The family clearly revolved around his schedule and preferences, with Patricia orchestrating elaborate Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations that showcased their social standing and family unity. Amanda, David's younger sister, was 25 and had recently completed her MBA from a prestigious East Coast university, though she'd returned to Denver to work in the family's various business interests rather than striking out on her own. She possessed the kind of effortless beauty that comes from good genetics and expensive maintenance, with platinum blonde hair and a wardrobe that suggested unlimited shopping budgets. What had seemed like confidence during our initial meetings had gradually revealed itself as entitlement, the attitude of someone who'd never been told no or experienced genuine consequences for poor behavior. The family's wealth was evident, but not ostentatious, displayed through understated luxury that spoke of old money and established social position. Their home was a colonial revival mansion in Cherry Hills Village, complete with manicured grounds, a 3-car garage housing vehicles that cost more than most people's houses, and interior design that belonged in architectural magazines. Patricia wore jewelry that sparkled with genuine diamonds and emeralds, while Judge Collins collected rare books and vintage wines that he displayed in a library that could have belonged to a private university. During our engagement, I'd attributed the family's occasional condescending comments to typical upper-class awkwardness around people from different backgrounds. My own family was solidly middle class, with parents who'd worked multiple jobs to put me through college and who viewed financial success as something earned through hard work, rather than inherited through family connections. The cultural differences between our families had seemed manageable during the excitement of wedding planning, especially since David appeared to bridge those gaps naturally, treating my parents with respect and showing genuine interest in their lives and perspectives. The wedding itself had been an elegant affair held at the Denver Country Club, with 200 guests who represented the intersection of legal, political, and business circles that defined the Collins family's social world. My own guest list had been smaller but heartfelt, including college friends, work colleagues, and extended family members who'd traveled from across the country to celebrate with us. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of as a little girl, complete with flowers that had been featured in bridal magazines and a reception that rivaled society weddings I'd seen in newspapers. The early months of marriage had been an adjustment period that I'd assumed was normal for any couple learning to blend their lives and families. David's work as a corporate attorney demanded long hours and frequent travel, but he made efforts to maintain work-life balance and seemed genuinely committed to building our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and shared goals. We'd purchased a beautiful home in Highlands Ranch, a compromise between the downtown condo I'd preferred and the Cherry Hills Village estate that Patricia had lobbied for, and spent weekends decorating and gardening together like the happy newlyweds we appeared to be. The first real signs of trouble had emerged during family gatherings, where I began to notice patterns of behavior that hadn't been obvious during the more formal interactions of our engagement period. Patricia would make comments about my cooking that seemed supportive on the surface but carried subtle implications that my efforts didn't meet family standards. She'd offer to teach me her recipes with the suggestion that David was accustomed to certain levels of culinary excellence. Or she'd bring extra food to dinners I was hosting with explanations that she wanted to ensure there was enough for everyone. Amanda's behavior had become increasingly challenging as well, though her criticism was delivered with the kind of humor that made it difficult to address directly, without seeming oversensitive. She'd comment on my clothing choices with suggestions that certain styles might be more appropriate for family events, or she'd share stories about David's previous girlfriends with details that seemed designed to highlight their superior breeding or social connections. When I'd mention professional achievements or workplace recognition, she'd respond with comments about how corporate careers often left women unfulfilled in ways they didn't realize until it was too late to pursue more meaningful paths like full-time motherhood. Judge Collins had maintained a more distant but equally problematic approach, treating me with polite formality that never evolved into genuine warmth or acceptance. He'd ask perfunctory questions about my work, but his attention would visibly wander when I attempted to provide detailed answers, as if marketing was beneath his intellectual interest. During political discussions, he'd acknowledge my opinions with the kind of patronizing patience usually reserved for children who are trying to participate in adult conversations. His praise, when it came, was always qualified with suggestions for improvement or comparisons to standards I hadn't quite achieved. The family's attitudes toward my career had been particularly frustrating, though I'd tried to address their concerns through patience and persistent professionalism. They seemed to view my job as a temporary hobby that I'd abandon once David and I started having children, despite my repeated explanations that I found the work fulfilling and intended to continue my career regardless of family planning decisions. Patricia would make comments about how demanding careers could interfere with family priorities, while Amanda would share articles about successful women who'd left corporate positions to focus on creating stable homes for their husbands and children. When David and I had announced my pregnancy after 8 months of marriage, the family's response had been enthusiastic but laden with expectations and assumptions that immediately made me uncomfortable. Patricia had begun planning the nursery and selecting baby names without consulting us, while Amanda had started shopping for infant clothing and equipment that reflected her own aesthetic preferences rather than ours. Judge Collins had made pronouncements about family traditions and expectations for child-rearing that suggested my own opinions about parenting would be subordinate to established Collins family practices. The pregnancy itself had been challenging from the beginning, with morning sickness that lasted well beyond the typical first trimester timeline and fatigue that made maintaining my work schedule increasingly difficult. David had been supportive in practical ways, handling household tasks that I couldn't manage, and accompanying me to medical appointments when his schedule allowed. But I'd begun to notice that he seemed more concerned about how my condition was affecting family gatherings than about my own comfort and well-being. When I'd needed to skip Sunday dinners due to nausea or exhaustion, he'd express frustration about disappointing his parents rather than offering understanding about my physical limitations. The family's response to my pregnancy symptoms had been dismissive and often openly critical, with Patricia sharing stories about her own pregnancies that emphasized her ability to maintain normal activities and social obligations, despite any discomfort. She'd suggest remedies and dietary changes with the implication that my symptoms were the result of poor self-care or insufficient attention to proper pregnancy management. Amanda would comment on my appearance during family gatherings, noting changes in my complexion or energy levels with observations that seemed designed to highlight my shortcomings rather than offer genuine support. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, my obstetrician, had been monitoring the pregnancy closely due to some irregularities in early blood tests and my history of irregular menstrual cycles. She was a warm, competent physician who'd been recommended by several colleagues, and her approach to prenatal care balanced appropriate caution with reassuring professionalism. During routine appointments, she'd explain that first pregnancies often involved uncertainties, and that the symptoms I was experiencing, while uncomfortable, weren't necessarily indicators of serious problems. Her calm demeanor and thorough explanations had provided comfort during a time when everyone else seemed to have opinions about what I should be feeling or doing differently. The 12-week appointment had been scheduled as a routine checkup that I'd expected would mark the transition into the safer second trimester phase of pregnancy. David had been unable to attend due to a court appearance that couldn't be rescheduled, but we discussed celebrating that evening with dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. I'd been looking forward to finally sharing our news with friends and extended family members, having followed the conventional wisdom about waiting until the risk of miscarriage decreased significantly after the first trimester.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Morgan's expression during the ultrasound examination had been the first indication that something was seriously wrong. The screen that should have displayed a healthy, active fetus instead showed images that even my untrained eye could recognize as abnormal. The heartbeat that we'd heard clearly during previous appointments was absent, replaced by a silence that filled the examination room with dread. Dr. Morgan's gentle explanation that the fetus had stopped developing and that my body would likely begin the miscarriage process naturally had felt like hearing news about someone else's pregnancy, as if the words couldn't possibly be referring to the baby David and I had been planning and preparing for. The physical aspects of the miscarriage had been manageable with appropriate medical support, but the emotional devastation had been overwhelming in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The loss felt like a fundamental failure of my body, and my ability to protect the life that had been growing inside me. The pregnancy symptoms that had been challenging but reassuring suddenly became cruel reminders of what I'd lost, with continued nausea and breast tenderness that persisted for days after the baby was gone. Sleep became elusive as my mind replayed every decision I'd made during the pregnancy, searching for explanations or actions that might have prevented the loss. David's initial response had been appropriately supportive, holding me while I cried, and handling the practical tasks like calling our families and rescheduling work commitments. He had taken time off from his law firm to stay home with me during the worst days, ordering takeout from my favorite restaurants and sitting beside me on the couch while I processed the grief and physical recovery. For several days, it had felt like we were facing the crisis together as a united couple who would emerge stronger from shared adversity. The problems had begun when it came time to inform his family about the miscarriage and navigate their response to our loss. David had called his parents while I was resting, and I'd overheard fragments of conversation that suggested they were more concerned about the inconvenience to family plans than about our emotional well-being. Patricia had apparently been in the middle of shopping for nursery furniture and had expressed frustration about needing to cancel orders and return purchases. Amanda had already begun planning a baby shower and seemed annoyed about needing to contact guests and vendors to cancel arrangements. When the family had finally visited to offer their condolences, the interaction had been awkward and perfunctory rather than genuinely supportive. Patricia had brought a casserole and flowers, but her demeanor had been more appropriate for a social obligation than a family crisis. She'd made comments about how these things happen for a reason, and how we were young enough to try again soon, as if the pregnancy I'd lost could be easily replaced with another attempt. Judge Collins had offered brief words of sympathy before transitioning into discussions about work and family business matters, treating our loss as a temporary setback rather than a genuine tragedy. Amanda's response had been the most troubling, though her cruelty had been disguised as concern and advice rather than outright hostility. She'd suggested that perhaps the miscarriage was a sign that we should wait longer before trying to have children, giving our marriage more time to mature and our finances more opportunity to stabilize. She'd shared stories about friends who'd experienced miscarriages and then gone on to have healthy pregnancies, but her tone had suggested that their successes were the result of better preparation or superior health, rather than simple biological lottery. Most painfully, she'd implied that career stress might have contributed to the pregnancy loss, suggesting that women who prioritized professional achievement often struggled with fertility and pregnancy maintenance. The weeks following the miscarriage had revealed the true nature of David's relationship with his family and his willingness to prioritize their comfort over my emotional needs. When I'd expressed hurt about their response to our loss, he'd defended their behavior by explaining their awkwardness around emotional topics and their generational differences in discussing reproductive issues. When I'd asked him to limit family gatherings until I felt stronger emotionally, he'd expressed concern about offending his parents and suggested that staying connected with family would be better for my healing process than isolating ourselves during a difficult time. The breaking point had come during a family dinner 3 weeks after the miscarriage, when Patricia had made comments about how some women seemed to have more difficulty carrying pregnancies to term and perhaps needed additional medical evaluation to identify underlying problems. Amanda had added observations about lifestyle factors that could impact fertility, with specific mentions of work stress, dietary choices, and exercise habits that seemed designed to suggest my own responsibility for the pregnancy loss. David had remained silent during these exchanges, apparently prioritizing family harmony over defending his wife's dignity and emotional well-being. Tonight's dinner had been my first attempt to rejoin family gatherings, after taking several weeks to focus on grief counseling and emotional recovery. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the therapist I'd been seeing twice weekly, had encouraged me to gradually resume normal activities while maintaining clear boundaries about acceptable behavior and conversation topics. She'd helped me develop strategies for responding to insensitive comments and suggested ways to communicate my needs clearly to family members who might not understand the depth of pregnancy loss grief. The evening had started pleasantly enough, with conversation focused on safe topics like work developments, local news, and upcoming family events that didn't involve children or pregnancy. I'd brought Patricia's favorite sweet potato casserole, made from a family recipe she'd shared with me during happier times, and had spent considerable effort preparing other contributions to the meal that would demonstrate my continued commitment to family traditions and gatherings. For the first hour, it had seemed like we might be able to navigate the dinner without incident, establishing a new normal that acknowledged our loss without making it the central focus of every interaction. The shift in atmosphere had been subtle at first, beginning with Amanda's comments about a mutual friend's recent pregnancy announcement, and her speculation about whether some people were simply more naturally suited to motherhood than others. Patricia had joined the conversation with observations about family genetics and the tendency for certain traits to be passed down through maternal lines, with specific mentions of fertility, health, and the ability to carry pregnancies successfully. Judge Collins had added comments about the importance of family planning and the wisdom of ensuring optimal conditions before attempting to conceive children. David's failure to redirect the conversation or defend me from their increasingly pointed comments had been as devastating as the words themselves. He'd sat beside me in silence, occasionally nodding in agreement with his family's observations, or adding his own comments that seemed designed to demonstrate his alignment with their perspectives rather than his loyalty to his wife. When Amanda had made her final, crushing comment about my inability to keep a baby alive, David's reaction had been to look uncomfortable rather than outraged, embarrassed by the awkwardness rather than angered by the cruelty directed toward his wife. Standing in that doorway, listening to the laughter that followed Amanda's vicious words, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The grief and self-doubt that had dominated my emotional landscape for 6 weeks was suddenly overshadowed by a cold, clear anger that seemed to burn away the fog of depression and uncertainty that had been clouding my judgment. These people had taken my most devastating loss and turned it into entertainment, had weaponized my pain for their own amusement, and had done so while expecting me to continue participating in their family gatherings with gratitude and submission. The casserole dish in my hands felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the symbolism of all the efforts I'd made to earn acceptance from people who had never intended to grant it. The recipe I'd followed so carefully, the time I'd spent preparing their favorite foods, the energy I'd invested in trying to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by their response to my tragedy, suddenly seemed like evidence of my own foolishness, rather than demonstrations of family commitment. I'd been trying to earn love from people who viewed me as fundamentally inferior, seeking approval from individuals who had already decided I wasn't worthy of basic human decency. Amanda's laughter was still echoing in the dining room when I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of fleeing to my car in tears or attempting to defend myself against their cruelty, I would stay and discover exactly what kind of people I'd been trying so desperately to please. The woman who had spent 6 weeks questioning her own worth and wondering if she was somehow responsible for her pregnancy loss was being replaced by someone harder and more calculating, someone who understood that kindness was wasted on people who interpreted it as weakness. I set the casserole dish down on Patricia's antique sideboard with deliberate care, the sound of ceramic against wood cutting through the conversation like a blade. The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward me, some showing surprise at my continued presence, others displaying the kind of nervous awareness that comes when people realize they may have pushed too far. David's face had gone pale, perhaps finally recognizing that his wife's patience with his family's behavior had reached its absolute limit. Patricia recovered first, her social training kicking in to address the sudden tension in the room. "Sarah, dear, I hope you know Amanda was just trying to lighten the mood. We've all been walking on eggshells around you for weeks, and perhaps a little humor isn't inappropriate at this point. You can't expect us to treat you like fragile china forever." Her voice carried the tone of someone accustomed to managing social situations and smoothing over awkward moments, but there was an underlying hardness that suggested she was more annoyed by my reaction than concerned about my feelings. Judge Collins cleared his throat in the authoritative manner he used to regain control during courtroom proceedings. "Sarah, I think we all understand that you've been going through a difficult time, but perhaps it's worth considering that dwelling on disappointments isn't healthy for anyone involved. Life includes setbacks, and the mark of mature individuals is their ability to move forward without expecting others to accommodate their emotional needs indefinitely." His words were delivered with the kind of measured authority that he'd used to silence hundreds of attorneys and defendants, the voice of someone accustomed to having his pronouncements accepted without argument. Amanda, emboldened by her parents' support, doubled down on her cruelty with the confidence of someone who'd never faced genuine consequences for her behavior. "Honestly, Sarah, it's been 6 weeks. Most women would have moved on by now and started trying again instead of making everyone else miserable, with constant reminders of something that happens to lots of people. Maybe if you spent less time feeling sorry for yourself and more time taking care of your health, you'd have better luck next time." Her words were delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the expression of someone who enjoyed inflicting pain while maintaining plausible deniability about her intentions. David finally found his voice, though his words revealed more about his priorities than his character. "Sarah, maybe we should head home. It's been a long day, and I think everyone's emotions are running a little high tonight. We can talk about this later when everyone's had time to calm down." His suggestion was classic conflict avoidance, the response of someone more concerned about maintaining family peace than addressing his wife's legitimate grievances. He wasn't defending me or condemning his family's behavior. He was simply trying to remove me from the situation before it escalated further. I looked around the dining room, taking in the faces of people who had just revealed their true nature with stunning clarity. Patricia's expression combined irritation with barely concealed contempt, the look of someone who had tolerated an unwelcome presence long enough and was ready for it to disappear. Judge Collins appeared bored by the entire interaction, as if my emotional response to his family's cruelty was a tedious interruption to more important matters. Amanda was practically glowing with satisfaction, pleased with her successful delivery of maximum pain with minimal consequences. Most devastating was David's face, which showed embarrassment and frustration directed not at his family's behavior but at my refusal to absorb their abuse silently. He wasn't angry about what they'd said. He was angry that I was making it into a problem that required his attention and intervention. The man I'd married, the person I'd believed would protect and defend me through life's challenges, was looking at me like I was the source of difficulty rather than the victim of inexcusable cruelty. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that I wasn't dealing with people who had temporarily lost perspective during a stressful situation. These weren't basically good individuals who had made poor choices in their response to tragedy. These were fundamentally cruel people who had been waiting for an opportunity to reveal their true feelings about me, and my miscarriage had simply provided them with ammunition they felt justified in using. The pregnancy loss hadn't changed their opinion of me. It had simply given them permission to express it openly. The grief counseling sessions with Dr. Walsh had included discussions about identifying toxic relationships and recognizing when people's responses to trauma revealed their authentic character rather than temporary lapses in judgment. She'd explained that crisis situations often stripped away social pretenses and showed people's genuine priorities, values, and capacity for empathy. The way individuals responded to others' pain and vulnerability provided crucial information about their fundamental nature and their worthiness of continued relationship investment. Standing in that dining room, surrounded by the remnants of a meal I'd helped prepare for people who viewed my suffering as entertainment, I realized I'd been given a gift of clarity that would have been impossible to achieve under normal circumstances. The Collins family had shown me exactly who they were when they thought my pain had made me too weak to fight back. They'd revealed their true feelings about my place in their family hierarchy and their expectations for how I should respond to their abuse. Most importantly, they'd demonstrated David's actual priorities when forced to choose between protecting his wife and maintaining family harmony. The woman who had entered this house 3 hours earlier, hoping to rebuild relationships and demonstrate her resilience in the face of tragedy, no longer existed. The person standing in this dining room was someone harder and more calculating, someone who understood that kindness was a luxury she could no longer afford with people who interpreted it as weakness. The Collins family had just declared war on someone they assumed was defenseless, and they were about to discover exactly how wrong they were about my capacity for strategic thinking and long-term planning. I picked up my purse from the sideboard, moving with deliberate calm that seemed to unnerve everyone present. "You're absolutely right, Patricia. I can't expect you to treat me like fragile china forever. In fact, I don't think I'll be expecting anything from any of you ever again." My voice was steady and clear, carrying none of the emotional tremor they'd probably anticipated. "David, I'll be in the car when you're ready to leave. Take your time saying goodbye to your family. I have a feeling it might be a while before you see them again." The silence that followed my words was thick with tension and confusion. They'd expected tears, arguments, or desperate attempts to defend myself against their accusations. Instead, they were confronted with controlled calm and a promise that suggested consequences they hadn't anticipated. Patricia's social radar was clearly indicating that something had shifted in ways she didn't understand. while Judge Collins appeared to be reassessing the situation with the wariness of someone who just realized he might have misjudged his opponent. Amanda, however, couldn't resist one final attempt to inflict damage, apparently mistaking my composure for surrender rather than strategy. "Maybe this is for the best, Sarah. You never really fit in with this family anyway. We all knew David was settling when he married you, but we hoped you'd at least try harder to become the kind of woman who could make him happy." Her words were delivered with the satisfaction of someone delivering what she believed would be a killing blow, the final insult that would send me fleeing in tears and defeat. Instead, her comment produced something she hadn't expected. A smile. Not a sad or bitter expression, but a genuine smile of someone who had just received exactly the information they needed to proceed with confidence. "Thank you, Amanda. That's incredibly helpful to know." I turned toward the doorway, then paused to look back at the assembled family one final time. "I hope you all enjoyed tonight's entertainment. It's been absolutely illuminating." Walking toward the front door of the Collins family mansion, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The grief and self-doubt that had been crushing me since the miscarriage were still present, but they were now accompanied by something more powerful: purpose. These people had taken my most devastating loss and turned it into a weapon against me, believing that my pain had made me too weak to retaliate effectively. They'd made assumptions about my character based on my previous attempts to earn their acceptance through kindness and accommodation. The Collins family was about to learn that they'd gravely misjudged the woman they'd just declared war against. The marketing coordinator, who specialized in crisis management and reputation rehabilitation, was about to apply those professional skills to a personal situation with the kind of focused intensity that had built my career. They'd given me 6 weeks to process my grief, develop emotional clarity, and recognize their true nature, and now they were going to face the consequences of underestimating someone they'd assumed was defenseless. Sitting in my car in their circular driveway, waiting for David to finish whatever conversation was happening inside their house, I began planning my next moves with the systematic approach I used for complex client campaigns. The Collins family had just provided me with all the ammunition I needed to destroy their carefully constructed social facade, and I intended to use every piece of information I'd gathered about their vulnerabilities, secrets, and dependencies over the past 2 years of forced family interactions. They'd mocked my miscarriage at dinner, assuming my grief had made me too weak to fight back effectively. Instead, they'd just awakened to something fierce and calculating in someone who possessed the professional skills and personal motivation necessary to dismantle their lives with surgical precision. The Collins family was about to discover that the woman they'd tried to break was far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined, and their cruelty had just become the foundation of their own destruction. The drive home from the Collins mansion passed in complete silence, with David gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white, and his jaw clenched in the way that indicated he was preparing for a confrontation he didn't want to have. I stared out the passenger window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood, my mind already working through the extensive research I would need to conduct before implementing the comprehensive plan that was taking shape in my thoughts. The woman who had walked into that dining room hoping to rebuild family relationships no longer existed, replaced by someone who understood that the Collins family had just made the most expensive mistake of their privileged lives. When we finally pulled into our driveway, David remained motionless behind the wheel for several minutes, apparently gathering courage for whatever speech he'd been rehearsing during the 20-minute drive from his parents' house. The exterior lights illuminated our front yard with its carefully maintained landscaping, the kind of suburban perfection that had seemed so important when we'd purchased the house 18 months earlier. Now the manicured lawn and decorative flower beds felt like props in a performance that had been exposed as fundamentally hollow, beautiful facades hiding the rot that had been festering beneath the surface of our marriage. "Sarah, we need to talk about what happened tonight," David finally said, his voice carrying the measured tone he used when preparing to deliver bad news to clients. "I understand you're still processing the miscarriage, but you can't continue attacking my family every time they try to include you in normal conversations. They're doing their best to move forward, and your constant emotional reactions are making it impossible for anyone to relax or feel comfortable around you." The words hit me like physical blows, each syllable revealing the depth of his betrayal and his complete inability to recognize the cruelty his family had just inflicted on his grieving wife. He wasn't acknowledging their inappropriate behavior or expressing outrage about their treatment of me. Instead, He was positioning me as the problem that needed to be managed and controlled. The man I'd married, the person who had promised to honor and protect me through sickness and health, was sitting in our driveway criticizing my response to being mocked and humiliated during the most vulnerable period of my life. Normal conversations, I repeated slowly, testing the phrase as if it were evidence in a legal proceeding. Is that what you call Amanda's comment about my inability to keep a baby alive? Is that your definition of normal family conversation, David? My voice remained calm and controlled, but I could see him flinch at the direct quotation of his sister's words. He'd been hoping to frame the evening's events in vague terms that minimized their impact and allowed him to avoid confronting the specific cruelty that had been directed toward me. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his discomfort obvious as he struggled to find a response that would defend his family without completely abandoning any pretense of supporting his wife. Amanda has always had a sharp sense of humor, and I think she was just trying to lighten the mood after weeks of everyone walking on eggshells around you. Maybe her delivery wasn't perfect, but you have to admit that dwelling on the miscarriage indefinitely isn't healthy for anyone involved. Even Dr. Walsh said that avoiding social situations and isolating yourself could interfere with your healing process. The manipulation was so blatant it was almost impressive in its audacity. He was using my own therapist's advice about gradually resuming normal activities to justify his family's abusive behavior, twisting professional recommendations about social engagement into permission for them to mock my pregnancy loss as entertainment. He was also revealing that he'd been discussing my therapy sessions with his family, sharing private information about my mental health treatment without my knowledge or consent. "You've been discussing my therapy with your family," I said, making it a statement rather than a question. Dr. Walsh's recommendations about my healing process have become family talking points that justify their behavior toward me. The betrayal was layers deep, extending beyond his failure to defend me tonight to encompass systematic violations of privacy and trust that had apparently been ongoing for weeks. David's guilty expression confirmed what his words had already revealed. "My mother was worried about you, and she asked if the counseling was helping. I might have mentioned that Dr. Walsh thought social engagement was important for your recovery. I didn't share anything private or confidential, just general observations about the treatment recommendations." His defensive tone suggested he knew the distinction he was trying to draw was meaningless, but he was clinging to technicalities to avoid acknowledging the fundamental breach of trust his behavior represented. "General observations," I repeated, allowing silence to fill the car while he processed the implications of what he'd just admitted. "You've been providing your family with regular updates about my mental health treatment, giving them ammunition to use against me when they decide my grief has become inconvenient for their social gatherings. You've been treating my therapy sessions like intelligence briefings for people who view my emotional well-being as a problem to be managed, rather than a condition deserving of their support." The accuracy of my assessment was evident in David's inability to formulate a coherent defense. He'd been caught in behavior that was so obviously wrong he couldn't construct arguments to justify it. But his loyalty to his family remained stronger than his commitment to his wife's privacy and dignity. "It's not like that, Sarah. My family cares about you, and they've been trying to understand how to help you through this difficult time. If sharing some basic information about your treatment helps them provide better support, I don't see how that's necessarily wrong." The conversation was revealing David's true character with the same devastating clarity that dinner had exposed his family's nature. The man I'd married wasn't just failing to protect me from their cruelty. He was actively enabling it by providing them with information they could use to justify their behavior and maximize their psychological impact. He'd turned my vulnerability into intelligence that could be weaponized against me, all while convincing himself that he was acting in my best interests. "Better support," I said, my voice remaining steady despite the fury building inside me. "Like Amanda's comment about my inability to keep a baby alive. Like your mother's suggestions that some women have more difficulty maintaining pregnancies than others. Like your father's observations about mature individuals moving forward without expecting others to accommodate their emotional needs indefinitely. That's the kind of support your family has been providing based on the information you've been sharing about my therapy sessions." David fell silent, apparently recognizing that his attempts to minimize or reframe his family's behavior were failing to gain traction with someone who had been systematically documenting their pattern of abuse. The marketing coordinator who specialized in crisis management and reputation analysis had been taking notes throughout our marriage, gathering evidence that would now serve purposes he never could have anticipated. Every conversation, every family gathering, every interaction that had seemed merely unpleasant at the time had been building toward this moment of clarity and strategic planning. "I need some time to think," I said finally, opening the car door with deliberate calm. "I'll be sleeping in the guest room tonight, and I'd prefer not to continue this conversation until I've had time to process everything that's happened." The statement wasn't a request for permission, but an announcement of my intentions, delivered with the kind of authority that made it clear I wasn't seeking his approval or input about my decision. David's expression shifted from defensive guilt to something approaching panic as he realized the conversation wasn't proceeding according to his expectations. He'd assumed that his explanations would eventually persuade me to accept his family's behavior and his own failures, that patience and persistence would eventually wear down my resistance to their treatment. Instead, he was confronting someone who had moved beyond seeking his understanding to planning her own course of action independent of his preferences. "Sarah, don't you think you're overreacting to what was essentially a family dinner with some awkward moments? We can work through this if you're willing to meet my family halfway and recognize that they're doing their best to support us during a difficult time. Sleeping in separate rooms and refusing to discuss the situation isn't going to solve anything." His voice carried a note of desperation that suggested he was beginning to understand that his wife's transformation wasn't temporary emotional volatility, but a fundamental shift in how she viewed their relationship and his family. "Overreacting," I repeated, adding the word to my mental catalog of revealing phrases that demonstrated how thoroughly he'd internalized his family's perspective on appropriate responses to their behavior. "Your sister mocked my miscarriage at a family dinner, your parents supported her cruelty, and you sat in silence while they turned my pregnancy loss into entertainment. Now you're telling me that recognizing their behavior as unacceptable constitutes overreacting to awkward moments. I'm beginning to understand that we have very different definitions of basic human decency." Walking into our house, I felt the strange sensation of seeing familiar surroundings with completely new perspective. The living room furniture we'd selected together, the artwork we'd purchased during weekend antiquing trips, the photographs displaying happy moments from our courtship and early marriage, all seemed like evidence from someone else's life. The woman who had cared about creating a beautiful home for her husband and his family no longer existed, replaced by someone who viewed every shared possession as a potential asset in divorce proceedings that were beginning to seem inevitable. The guest bedroom had been decorated as a showcase for visiting family members, with neutral colors and expensive linens that would photograph well for the home tours Patricia occasionally arranged for charity organizations. Sitting on the bed where David's relatives had slept during holiday visits, I began planning the research project that would consume my attention for the foreseeable future. The Collins family had just declared war on someone whose professional expertise involved investigating, analyzing, and strategically responding to reputation crises, and they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. My laptop contained years of accumulated information about the Collins family's business interests, social connections, and professional relationships. Data I'd gathered during 2 years of forced attendance at their dinner parties, charity events, and family celebrations. What had seemed like tedious social obligations at the time had actually been intelligence-gathering opportunities, providing insights into their vulnerabilities, dependencies, and secrets that could now be used for purposes they never could have imagined. Judge William Collins had built his career and reputation on a foundation of carefully managed public image and political connections that required constant maintenance and protection. His position on the bench made him particularly vulnerable to scandals or controversies that could be interpreted as compromising his judicial objectivity or ethical standards. The legal community in Denver was small and insular, with professional reputations that could be damaged or destroyed through strategic exposure of inappropriate behavior or conflicts of interest. Patricia Collins had spent decades constructing her identity as the perfect political wife and social hostess, roles that required maintaining relationships with hundreds of influential individuals who could withdraw their support if her behavior was perceived as inappropriate or embarrassing. Her position in Denver's charitable and cultural organizations was built on trust and respectability that could be undermined through public exposure of her treatment of family members during their most vulnerable moments. Amanda Collins had recently begun her career in the family's various business interests, positions that required maintaining professional relationships with clients and colleagues who expected certain standards of character and judgment. Her MBA credentials and family connections had opened doors that could be closed through strategic exposure of her behavior toward vulnerable individuals, particularly if that exposure was documented and widely disseminated through professional networks. David's law firm represented corporate clients who valued stability and ethical judgment in their legal counsel, qualities that could be questioned if his personal life was perceived as reflecting poor character or judgment. His partnership track required maintaining relationships with senior attorneys and clients who could be influenced by information about his treatment of his wife during a medical crisis. The Collins family's social and professional positions were built on carefully maintained facades that required ongoing protection from scandals or controversies that could damage their reputations in Denver's interconnected business and social communities. They'd assumed that my grief and vulnerability would prevent me from recognizing their weaknesses or developing strategies to exploit them. Instead, they'd given me both the motivation and the time necessary to plan a comprehensive campaign that would target every aspect of their carefully constructed public images. My phone contained contact information for dozens of journalists, marketing professionals, and social media influencers who specialized in investigating and exposing individual and corporate malfeasance. The professional network I'd built during 5 years in Denver's advertising industry included people who possessed the skills and resources necessary to conduct comprehensive background research, document inappropriate behavior, and ensure widespread dissemination of damaging information through multiple channels. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had spent our therapy sessions helping me develop strategies for recognizing toxic relationships and protecting myself from individuals who exploited others' vulnerabilities for personal advantage. Her professional insights into psychological manipulation and emotional abuse would prove invaluable for understanding and documenting the Collins family's behavior patterns in ways that would resonate with other professionals and potential allies. The miscarriage support group I'd been attending included women who had experienced similar losses and understood the devastating impact of insensitive or cruel responses from family members and friends. Their stories had revealed patterns of behavior that extended far beyond my own experience, suggesting that the Collins family's treatment of me was part of a broader social problem that deserved public attention and professional scrutiny. Morrison and Associates had extensive experience in crisis management and reputation rehabilitation, services that could be reverse-engineered to create comprehensive reputation destruction campaigns for individuals and organizations that deserved professional consequences for their behavior. The same techniques used to protect clients from scandal could be adapted to ensure that scandals received maximum exposure and impact when targeting deserving victims. The Denver legal community maintained detailed records of judicial behavior, attorney conduct, and professional relationships that could be analyzed to identify potential conflicts of interest, ethical violations, or inappropriate connections that might warrant investigation by state bar associations or judicial oversight committees. Judge Collins's decades on the bench had undoubtedly created a paper trail of decisions and relationships that could be scrutinized for patterns suggesting bias, favoritism, or other forms of judicial misconduct. Denver's charity and cultural organizations maintained extensive records of donations, volunteer activities, and leadership positions that could be analyzed to identify inconsistencies between public personas and private behavior. Patricia Collins's involvement in various charitable causes could be contrasted with her treatment of vulnerable family members to create compelling narratives about hypocrisy and character that would resonate with donor communities and volunteer networks. The Colorado business community maintained detailed records of corporate relationships, professional credentials, and industry connections that could be used to identify vulnerabilities in Amanda's career development and the family's various business interests. Her recent MBA graduation and entry into family businesses had created professional relationships that could be influenced by information about her character and judgment during personal crises. Social media platforms contained years of accumulated content from the Collins family members, including photographs, comments, and posts that could be analyzed for evidence of their attitudes toward vulnerable individuals, their responses to family crises, and their general character traits. Digital forensics techniques could be used to recover deleted content and establish comprehensive timelines of their behavior patterns. Financial records and business filings could be analyzed to identify potential tax irregularities, conflicts of interest, or other financial improprieties that might warrant investigation by relevant authorities. The Collins family's wealth and business interests had undoubtedly created complex financial structures that could be scrutinized for compliance with legal and ethical standards. Professional licensing boards maintained records of complaints, investigations, and disciplinary actions that could be enhanced through strategic submission of additional evidence about character and fitness issues. Judge Collins's judicial position, David's law license, and various professional credentials held by family members could all be subjected to formal review processes that would create official records of their behavior. The Colorado Department of Revenue maintained detailed records of property ownership, tax assessments, and financial transactions that could be analyzed for evidence of financial irregularities or inappropriate wealth accumulation. The family's extensive real estate holdings and investment portfolios could be scrutinized for compliance with disclosure requirements and tax obligations. Denver's social and cultural organizations maintained membership records, event attendance lists, and donation histories that could be used to identify individuals and institutions that might be influenced by information about the Collins family's treatment of vulnerable family members. Their extensive network of social connections could become a liability if those connections were systematically informed about their behavior. Professional associations and industry organizations maintained ethical standards and disciplinary procedures that could be activated through strategic submission of evidence about member conduct that violated professional standards. The Collins family's various professional memberships and certifications could all be subjected to formal review processes. The Denver media landscape included investigative journalists who specialized in exposing individual and institutional corruption, particularly when that corruption involved public officials or prominent community members. The Collins family's high profile in legal and social circles would make them attractive targets for journalists seeking stories that would generate significant public interest and professional recognition. Academic institutions maintained records of alumni activities, donor relationships, and community engagement that could be influenced by information about inappropriate behavior by graduates or supporters. The universities and professional schools that had educated Collins family members could be presented with evidence that reflected poorly on their alumni and their educational effectiveness. Client companies and business partners maintained relationships with the Collins family's various enterprises based on assumptions about their character, judgment, and ethical standards that could be undermined through strategic disclosure of information about their personal behavior. Corporate clients expected certain standards of professionalism and character from their legal and business advisors. The comprehensive research and strategic planning that would be required to destroy the Collins family's carefully constructed reputations would take weeks to complete properly. But the foundation for that campaign was already available through information I'd been unconsciously gathering for 2 years. Their assumption that my grief and vulnerability would prevent effective retaliation had been based on fundamental misunderstandings about my professional capabilities and personal resilience. The marketing coordinator who specialized in crisis management was about to demonstrate exactly how those professional skills could be applied to personal situations when motivation and opportunity aligned perfectly. The Collins family had just provided both the justification and the strategic opening necessary to dismantle their lives with the same systematic precision they'd used to attack mine. David's footsteps in the hallway indicated he was approaching the guest room, probably planning to continue the conversation he believed would eventually persuade me to accept his family's behavior and his own failures. The soft knock on the door confirmed his intention to persist with explanations and justifications that revealed his complete inability to recognize the fundamental shift that had occurred in our relationship. "Sarah, can we please finish talking about this? I know tonight was difficult, but I think there are some misunderstandings that we can clear up if you're willing to listen to my perspective on what happened." His voice carried the patient tone of someone who believed that persistence and reasonableness would eventually overcome any objection. the approach of someone who had never encountered genuine resistance to his family's behavior. "I'm not interested in your perspective right now, David. I need time to process tonight's events and develop my own understanding of what happened and what it means for our marriage." My response was delivered through the closed door, making it clear that I wasn't inviting further conversation or seeking his input about my decision-making process. The silence that followed suggested he was struggling to understand why his usual approach to managing family conflicts wasn't producing the expected results. Throughout our marriage, he'd been able to smooth over his family's inappropriate behavior through patience, explanations, and eventual acceptance that their treatment was the price of maintaining relationships with people who were fundamentally important to his identity and social position. "I love you, Sarah, and I know you love me. We can work through this if we approach it as a team instead of letting my family's awkwardness drive a wedge between us. They're not perfect people, but they're my family, and I need you to find a way to coexist with them if our marriage is going to work." The words revealed his expectation that I would ultimately accommodate his family's behavior regardless of its impact on my well-being, that love for him would eventually override my objections to their treatment. The response demonstrated his complete failure to understand that tonight's events had fundamentally altered my perception of him, our marriage, and the future I was willing to accept. The woman who had been trying to earn his family's acceptance no longer existed, replaced by someone who was planning to destroy them systematically and comprehensively. His assumption that family loyalty would eventually triumph over my objections to their cruelty was about to be tested in ways he could never have anticipated. "Good night, David," I said finally, ending the conversation with the finality of someone who had moved beyond seeking understanding to implementing strategy. The legal separation paperwork I would file next week would provide him with additional clarity about the consequences of choosing his family's comfort over his wife's dignity during the most vulnerable period of her life. Alone in the guest room, I opened my laptop and began the comprehensive research project that would consume my attention for the foreseeable future. The Collins family had mocked my miscarriage at dinner, assuming my grief had made me too weak to retaliate effectively. Instead, they'd just activated someone whose professional expertise in crisis management and reputation analysis was about to be focused with laser precision on dismantling their carefully constructed lives. They were about to discover that the woman they'd tried to break was far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined, and their cruelty had just become the foundation of their own destruction. The morning light streaming through the guest room windows found me exactly where I'd been since 3 in the morning. Surrounded by printouts, legal documents, and multiple laptops displaying financial records and social media profiles that painted a comprehensive picture of the Collins family's vulnerabilities. Sleep had become irrelevant once the full scope of my research began revealing patterns of behavior and potential leverage points that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. The family that had mocked my miscarriage at dinner was about to discover that their carefully constructed public personas were built on foundations far more fragile than they'd ever imagined. Marcus Rodriguez from Morrison & Associates answered his phone on the second ring despite the early hour, his voice alert and professional in the way that indicated he'd been expecting important calls related to ongoing crisis management campaigns. As our firm's lead investigative researcher and digital forensics specialist, Marcus possessed skills that had been instrumental in protecting our clients from reputation damage and exposing the misconduct of individuals who threatened their interests. His expertise in uncovering hidden information and developing comprehensive intelligence profiles was exactly what I needed for the campaign I was preparing to launch against the Collins family. "Sarah, good morning. I wasn't expecting to hear from you until next week when you're officially back from bereavement leave. Is everything all right with the Henderson account?" His concern was genuine, reflecting the collegial relationship we developed through 3 years of successful collaboration on challenging client projects. Marcus had been one of the few people at our firm who'd expressed appropriate sympathy about my miscarriage, sending thoughtful messages and offering practical support without the awkward boundary violations that had characterized other colleagues' responses. "Actually, Marcus, I'm calling about a personal matter that requires your specific expertise. I need comprehensive background research conducted on several individuals, and I'm willing to pay your standard consulting rates for after-hours work that wouldn't involve the firm or conflict with your professional obligations." The carefully worded request established clear boundaries between personal and professional engagement, while indicating that I was prepared to compensate him appropriately for services that would require discretion and skill. Marcus was quiet for a moment, probably processing the unusual nature of my request and considering the implications of conducting private research for a colleague. Sarah, you know I'm always willing to help with legitimate research needs, but I have to ask whether this involves anything that could create legal or ethical problems for either of us. Personal investigations can get complicated quickly, especially if they involve family disputes or divorce proceedings. The research would focus on publicly available information and documented behavior patterns that could be relevant for potential legal proceedings or professional complaints. Nothing illegal or unethical, just comprehensive analysis of information that's already in the public domain but scattered across multiple sources and databases. My explanation was technically accurate while avoiding details that might make him uncomfortable about accepting the project. I'm essentially asking you to do what you already do for our corporate clients, just applied to individuals rather than companies. The distinction seemed to reassure him, and his voice carried renewed interest as he considered the professional challenge the project might represent. What kind of individuals are we talking about? And what specific information are you hoping to find? The scope of research determines both the timeline and the cost, so I'll need some general parameters to provide accurate estimates. A family of prominent Denver professionals, including a sitting judge, a corporate attorney, and several business executives. I need comprehensive profiles including financial holdings, professional relationships, social media activity, legal proceedings, charitable involvement, and any documented complaints or controversies. The kind of complete intelligence package that would allow someone to understand their vulnerabilities and pressure points. The description was clinical and professional, focusing on deliverables rather than motivations. Marcus whistled softly, apparently recognizing the complexity and potential sensitivity of investigating individuals with significant social and professional standing in Denver's legal community. That's going to require accessing multiple databases, analyzing years of financial filings, reviewing court records, and probably some social engineering to gather information from sources who might not typically cooperate with formal requests. We're talking about at least 2 weeks of intensive work, possibly longer depending on what we find and how deep you want the analysis to go. Cost isn't a primary concern, and thoroughness is more important than speed. I want intelligence profiles that would allow someone to predict their behavior, identify their weaknesses, and develop strategies for maximum impact if those strategies ever became necessary. The phrasing suggested potential rather than definite action, maintaining plausible deniability about my intentions, while ensuring he understood the level of detail and strategic analysis I was seeking. I can have preliminary profiles completed within 1 week and comprehensive analysis finished in 2 weeks. My rate for this kind of private consulting is $300 per hour, and I estimate approximately 60 hours of work will be required for the level of detail you're describing. The total cost would be around $18,000, payable in advance through my private consulting company rather than Morrison & Associates. His professional tone indicated he'd moved into business mode, treating my request as a legitimate consulting engagement rather than a personal favor. The financial investment was substantial but entirely manageable, given my savings and the potential return on investment if the research enabled successful legal action or professional consequences for the Collins family. The money I'd been saving for our planned nursery renovation would serve a different purpose now, funding the comprehensive intelligence gathering that would provide the foundation for their systematic destruction. That's acceptable. I'll transfer the advance payment today, and I'll send you detailed target profiles and specific research requirements within the next few hours. I also need this project to remain completely confidential, with no documentation that connects the research to me personally or to any potential future legal proceedings. The confidentiality requirement was crucial for maintaining strategic advantage and preventing the Collins family from discovering the investigation until it was too late for them to take protective action. Marcus agreed to the confidentiality terms and provided banking information for transferring the advance payment through his private consulting company. His professionalism and discretion were exactly what I needed for launching the first phase of a campaign that would eventually expose the Collins family's behavior to everyone whose opinion mattered for their professional and social standing. The investment in professional-grade intelligence gathering would ensure that every aspect of their public destruction was based on documented facts and strategic analysis rather than emotional impulse. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's morning appointment slot had been available on short notice, probably due to a cancellation that reflected other patients' scheduling challenges rather than my therapist's lack of demand for her services. Her office in downtown Denver occupied the top floor of a converted Victorian mansion, with tall windows and carefully chosen artwork that created an atmosphere of professional warmth without the sterile feeling that characterized many mental health facilities. Our sessions over the past 6 weeks had focused primarily on grief processing and developing coping strategies for family stress. But today's conversation would require broader discussion of strategic planning and ethical decision-making. Sarah, you seem different today. More alert and focused than I've seen you since we started working together. How are you feeling about your emotional state and your progress in processing the miscarriage grief? Dr. Walsh's observational skills were part of what made her an effective therapist, but her ability to detect subtle changes in mood and presentation meant I needed to be careful about revealing too much about my current mental state and planning activities. I'm feeling more clarity about my situation and the relationships in my life. Last night's family dinner provided some important insights about how my husband's family views me and my place in their social structure. I think I'm finally ready to stop trying to earn acceptance from people who are never going to provide it, regardless of my efforts. The explanation was truthful, while avoiding details that might prompt professional concerns about my current psychological state or planned responses to recent events. Dr. Walsh leaned forward slightly, her expression indicating professional interest in the shift I was describing. That sounds like potentially significant progress in recognizing unhealthy relationship dynamics. Can you tell me more about what happened at the dinner and how it contributed to this new clarity about your family relationships? David's sister made comments about my miscarriage that were cruel and deliberately hurtful, and the rest of his family supported her behavior while David remained silent. It became clear that they view my grief as an inconvenience rather than a legitimate emotional response to tragedy, and that they expect me to absorb their abuse without resistance or consequences. The description focused on their behavior rather than my emotional response, presenting the situation as a rational analysis rather than an emotional reaction. How did you respond to their inappropriate behavior, and how are you feeling about that response now that you've had time to process the experience? Dr. Walsh's questions seemed designed to assess whether my reaction had been proportionate and healthy, rather than impulsive or potentially problematic for my own well-being. I remained calm and left the situation without engaging in arguments or emotional displays. I told them I wouldn't be expecting anything from them in the future, and I spent the night developing a clearer understanding of what their behavior means for my marriage and my future relationships with David's family. The response emphasized emotional regulation and strategic thinking, rather than reactive anger or desire for revenge. Dr. Walsh nodded approvingly, apparently viewing my description as evidence of healthy boundary setting and emotional maturity. It sounds like you're developing better skills for protecting yourself from toxic behavior, while maintaining your own emotional stability. That's exactly the kind of progress we've been working toward in our sessions. How are you planning to maintain those boundaries going forward? I'm exploring legal options for protecting myself from continued abuse, and I'm consulting with professionals who can help me understand my rights and options for ensuring appropriate consequences when people behave inappropriately toward vulnerable individuals. The phrasing suggested legitimate self-protection rather than offensive action, framing my planned campaign as defensive rather than aggressive. That sounds very reasonable and mature. It's important for people in your situation to understand their legal rights and available protections, especially when dealing with family members who may not respect appropriate boundaries voluntarily. Dr. Walsh's response indicated professional approval for seeking legal consultation and formal protection mechanisms. Are you also considering how these developments might affect your marriage and your relationship with David? David made it clear last night that he prioritizes his family's comfort over my emotional well-being, even when their behavior is clearly inappropriate and harmful. I'm consulting with attorneys about legal separation and divorce proceedings, since it appears that he's not capable of the kind of partnership I need for a healthy marriage. The explanation presented divorce as a rational response to irreconcilable differences, rather than an emotional reaction to temporary conflicts. Dr. Walsh's expression suggested she viewed this development as potentially positive for my emotional health and long-term well-being. Recognizing when relationships are fundamentally incompatible requires significant emotional strength and clarity. It sounds like you're making decisions based on careful analysis rather than temporary emotional reactions, which is exactly the kind of healthy thinking we've been developing in our sessions. The therapeutic session provided professional validation for the decision-making process I was implementing, confirming that my responses to the Collins family's behavior were appropriate and psychologically healthy, rather than symptoms of unresolved grief or emotional instability. Dr. Walsh's professional opinion would be valuable if David or his family attempted to characterize my actions as emotional breakdowns or grief-related irrationality, rather than legitimate responses to their documented behavior. Jennifer Martinez at Blackstone and Associates Family Law had built her reputation representing high-net-worth individuals in complex divorce proceedings that involve significant assets, business interests, and contested custody arrangements. Her office in downtown Denver's legal district reflected her success and professional standing, with floor-to-ceiling law books, expensive artwork, and furniture that conveyed authority and competence without ostentation. The consultation I'd scheduled for that afternoon would provide crucial information about legal strategies and procedural requirements for divorce proceedings that could maximize financial recovery while minimizing David's ability to protect family assets. Ms. Bennett, thank you for coming in today. I understand you're considering divorce proceedings and need information about your legal rights and available options given your specific circumstances. Can you provide me with some basic information about your marriage, your financial situation, and the primary factors that are motivating your consideration of divorce? Jennifer's direct approach and professional demeanor indicated she was accustomed to clients who required sophisticated legal strategies rather than basic emotional support. I've been married for 2 years to David Collins, who's a corporate attorney with Henderson Miller and Associates. We have significant joint assets including real estate, investment accounts, and business interests. And his family has substantial wealth that may have been commingled with our marital assets through gifts or joint investments. The primary factor motivating divorce consideration is his family's systematic abuse during my recent miscarriage, and his failure to protect me from their inappropriate behavior. Jennifer's expression sharpened with professional interest as she recognized the complexity of the legal and financial issues involved. The Collins family has significant social and political standing in Denver's legal community, which could complicate proceedings if they attempt to use their influence or connections to affect the outcome. However, documented abuse of a grieving spouse could provide leverage for favorable settlement negotiations, especially if that abuse can be connected to mental health impacts or financial damages. Quote, I have extensive documentation of their inappropriate behavior, including witness testimony and recorded conversations that demonstrate patterns of emotional abuse targeted specifically at my vulnerability during pregnancy loss. I'm also gathering comprehensive information about their financial holdings and business interests that might be relevant for asset division or spousal support calculations. The mention of documentation and investigation indicated serious preparation rather than impulsive emotional reaction. Excellent preparation will be crucial for maximizing your financial recovery and protecting your interests throughout the proceedings. Colorado is a no-fault divorce state, but documented abuse can influence spousal support calculations and asset division, especially if we can demonstrate that their behavior has impacted your earning capacity or mental health. Jennifer's strategic thinking was exactly what I needed for planning proceedings that would maximize both financial and reputational damage to the Collins family. I'm also interested in exploring whether their behavior might constitute actionable harassment or intentional infliction of emotional distress that could support separate civil proceedings beyond the divorce case. Their systematic targeting of my pregnancy loss seems to exceed the boundaries of typical family disputes and might warrant additional legal consequences. The suggestion of civil litigation beyond divorce proceedings would create multiple fronts for legal action that could overwhelm their ability to respond effectively. Jennifer nodded thoughtfully, apparently recognizing the potential for expanded legal action that could significantly increase the Collins family's legal and financial exposure. Intentional infliction of emotional distress claims can be challenging to prove, but systematic abuse of a grieving spouse during pregnancy loss could meet the extreme and outrageous conduct standards required for successful litigation. The key would be documenting the deliberate nature of their behavior and connecting it to specific psychological or financial damages you've suffered. The legal consultation provided crucial information about procedural requirements and strategic options for maximizing the impact of formal legal action against the Collins family. Jennifer's expertise in high-conflict divorce proceedings and her understanding of Denver's legal community would be invaluable for navigating the complex professional and social relationships that could influence the outcome of any legal action involving Judge Collins and his family. Rebecca Thompson at Denver Investigative Services specialized in comprehensive background research and surveillance services for attorneys, corporations, and private individuals who require detailed intelligence about targets of legal action or business competition. Her services included financial analysis, social media monitoring, witness location, and evidence gathering that could support both civil and criminal proceedings. The consultation I'd scheduled would provide information about additional investigative services that could supplement Marcus's research and ensure comprehensive intelligence gathering about all aspects of the Collins family's vulnerabilities. Ms. Bennett, I understand you need comprehensive investigative services related to potential legal proceedings against several individuals. Can you provide me with some basic information about the targets and the type of information you're hoping to gather through professional investigation? Rebecca's direct approach and matter-of-fact demeanor indicated experience with clients who required sophisticated investigative services for complex legal or business disputes. I need detailed financial analysis and behavioral documentation for a prominent Denver family that includes a sitting judge, several attorneys, and business executives. The investigation would support potential divorce proceedings and civil litigation related to documented harassment and emotional abuse. I'm particularly interested in evidence of financial irregularities, ethical violations, or behavioral patterns that could support legal action or professional complaints. The description focused on legitimate legal support rather than personal vendettas. Rebecca's expression indicated professional interest in the challenge and complexity of investigating individuals with significant social and professional standing. High-profile targets require sophisticated techniques and extensive resources, but they also tend to leave larger paper trails and have more complex financial structures that can be analyzed for irregularities. The key is developing comprehensive intelligence profiles that identify all potential vulnerabilities and pressure points that could be relevant for legal proceedings. I'm particularly interested in analyzing their charitable activities, professional relationships, and social media presence for evidence that contradicts their public personas or reveals inappropriate attitudes toward vulnerable individuals. Their treatment of family members during medical crises should be documented and contrasted with their public commitments to community service and professional ethics. The research focus would provide ammunition for destroying their public reputations in addition to supporting legal action. We can provide comprehensive social media analysis, financial forensics, professional background verification, and witness interviews that would create detailed intelligence profiles suitable for legal proceedings or professional complaints. Our standard rate for complex investigations involving multiple high-profile targets is $500 per hour, with estimated costs ranging from $20,000 to $40,000, depending on the scope and duration of the investigation. The pricing reflected the sophisticated nature of the services and the potential risks involved in investigating powerful individuals. The combined cost of professional legal representation and comprehensive investigative services would require a significant financial investment, but the potential return in terms of financial recovery from divorce proceedings and civil litigation could easily justify the expense. More importantly, the investment would ensure that my campaign against the Collins family was based on professional-grade intelligence and legal strategy, rather than emotional impulse or incomplete information. Dr. Rachel Kim at Denver Women's Health had been my primary care physician for 3 years before my pregnancy, and her practice specialized in comprehensive health care for professional women who required sophisticated medical support for career and family planning decisions. The appointment I'd scheduled would provide crucial medical documentation about the impact of emotional stress on my physical health and recovery from miscarriage, evidence that could be valuable for both legal proceedings and professional complaints about the Collins family's behavior. Sarah, I was so sorry to hear about your pregnancy loss. How are you feeling physically and emotionally? And are there any ongoing medical concerns related to the miscarriage or your recovery process? Dr. Kim's professional concern was evident in her careful attention to both physical and psychological aspects of my condition, the kind of comprehensive medical evaluation that could provide valuable documentation for legal purposes. Physically, I've recovered from the miscarriage itself, but I've been experiencing significant stress-related symptoms, including insomnia, appetite changes, and anxiety that seem to be getting worse rather than better over time. The stress is primarily related to inappropriate behavior from my husband's family, who have been making cruel comments about my pregnancy loss and treating my grief as an inconvenience rather than a legitimate medical and emotional condition. The explanation connected my ongoing symptoms to specific external stressors rather than internal psychological problems. Dr. Kim's expression reflected professional concern about the impact of family stress on my recovery process. Stress during pregnancy loss recovery can significantly impact both physical and emotional healing, and inappropriate family behavior can create trauma responses that interfere with normal grief processing. Have you been receiving appropriate emotional support from your husband and family? Or are you dealing with additional stressors that could be affecting your recovery? My husband has been prioritizing his family's comfort over my emotional well-being, and they've been making increasingly cruel comments about my inability to maintain the pregnancy and my ongoing grief responses. Last night, his sister publicly mocked my miscarriage at a family dinner, and the rest of his family supported her behavior while my husband remained silent. The description focused on documenting specific incidents that could be medically significant. That kind of behavior during pregnancy loss recovery can constitute psychological abuse that requires medical intervention and potentially legal protection. I'm going to document these incidents in your medical record and provide you with a detailed report about the impact of emotional stress on miscarriage recovery that could be useful if you need medical evidence for legal proceedings or professional complaints. Dr. Kim's response indicated professional recognition of abuse that warranted formal documentation and potential intervention. The medical documentation would provide crucial evidence about the connection between the Collins family's behavior and my ongoing health problems, establishing a clear causal relationship that could support both civil litigation and professional complaints. Dr. Kim's professional standing in Denver's medical community would lend credibility to any testimony or documentation she provided about the medical impact of emotional abuse during pregnancy loss recovery. Patricia Williams at the Colorado State Bar Association handled complaints and disciplinary proceedings related to attorney conduct and professional ethics violations. The consultation I'd scheduled would provide information about procedures for filing formal complaints against attorneys who engaged in behavior that violated professional standards, or reflected poorly on the legal profession's commitment to ethical conduct and community service. Ms. Bennett, I understand you're considering filing a professional conduct complaint related to an attorney's personal behavior toward family members. Can you provide me with some information about the specific conduct and how it might relate to professional ethics standards? Patricia's careful phrasing indicated experience with complaints that involved personal behavior rather than direct professional misconduct. The attorney in question has been enabling and participating in systematic emotional abuse directed at his wife during pregnancy loss recovery, including allowing family members to mock her miscarriage at social gatherings while refusing to provide appropriate protection or support. This behavior seems inconsistent with the professional ethics standards that require attorneys to demonstrate character and fitness appropriate for representing clients and serving the legal profession. The complaint focused on character issues rather than technical professional violations. Patricia nodded thoughtfully, apparently recognizing the potential significance of documented abuse for professional standing evaluation. Character and fitness standards do extend to personal behavior that reflects on an attorney's judgment, integrity, and fitness to represent clients and serve the legal profession. Documented emotional abuse of a vulnerable spouse could certainly warrant investigation and potential disciplinary action, especially if the behavior demonstrates a pattern of poor judgment or lack of empathy that could affect professional performance. Quote, I have extensive documentation of the inappropriate behavior, including witness testimony and recorded conversations that demonstrate his active participation in family abuse directed at pregnancy loss grief. I'm also gathering information about potential conflicts of interest and ethical violations related to his professional practice that might be relevant for comprehensive disciplinary review. The mention of additional professional misconduct suggested broader patterns of ethical problems beyond personal behavior. The Bar Association consultation provided crucial information about procedures and standards for professional complaints that could result in formal disciplinary action against David and potentially other family members who held professional licenses. The documentation I was gathering would support comprehensive complaints that could affect their professional standing and career prospects in addition to their personal reputations. Michael Chang at the Colorado Commission on Judicial Discipline handled complaints and investigations related to judicial conduct and ethics violations by sitting judges throughout the state. The consultation would provide information about procedures for filing formal complaints against judges whose personal behavior violated ethical standards or reflected poorly on the integrity and impartiality of the judicial system. Ms. Bennett, complaints against sitting judges require substantial evidence of conduct that violates judicial ethics standards or demonstrates unfitness for judicial office. Can you describe the specific behavior and explain how it might relate to judicial conduct standards? Michael's serious tone reflected the gravity of complaints against sitting judges and the high standards of evidence required for formal disciplinary action. Judge Collins has been participating in systematic emotional abuse directed at his daughter-in-law during pregnancy loss recovery, including supporting family members who publicly mocked her miscarriage at social gatherings. This behavior seems inconsistent with judicial ethics standards that require judges to maintain dignity, impartiality, and character appropriate for their position in the legal system. The complaint emphasized the connection between personal behavior and judicial fitness. Michael's expression indicated professional concern about behavior that could reflect on judicial integrity and community confidence in the court system. Judicial conduct standards do require judges to maintain personal behavior that upholds the dignity and integrity of the judicial office, even in private family settings. Documented emotional abuse could certainly warrant investigation, especially if the behavior demonstrates character issues that could affect judicial impartiality or community confidence in the court system. The judicial discipline consultation provided information about procedures that could result in formal investigation and potential disciplinary action against Judge Collins, creating additional pressure and professional consequences for the family's inappropriate behavior. The high-profile nature of judicial discipline proceedings would ensure public attention and media coverage that could amplify the reputational damage from formal complaints. The comprehensive legal and professional consultations had provided crucial information about multiple avenues for formal action against the Collins family, creating a coordinated campaign that would target every aspect of their professional and social standing simultaneously. The investment in professional legal representation and investigative services would ensure that every aspect of their destruction was based on documented evidence and strategic planning rather than emotional impulse. The woman who had been mocked for her miscarriage at a family dinner was no longer seeking acceptance or understanding from people who had revealed their fundamental cruelty and lack of character. Instead, she was implementing a comprehensive strategy that would ensure appropriate consequences for their behavior, while protecting other potential victims from similar abuse. The Collins family had assumed that grief would make me weak and vulnerable, but they had underestimated the strategic capabilities of someone whose professional expertise included crisis management, reputation analysis, and systematic problem-solving. The campaign that was now taking shape would expose their behavior to everyone whose opinion mattered for their professional and social standing, ensuring that their cruelty would be met with proportionate consequences that reflected the gravity of their systematic abuse. They had mocked my pregnancy loss as entertainment, assuming I was too weak to fight back effectively. Instead, they had awakened someone whose combination of professional expertise and personal motivation would prove far more dangerous than they could have imagined. 3 months after that devastating family dinner, I stood in the courtroom gallery watching Judge William Collins face formal censure from the Colorado Commission on Judicial Discipline. The charges against him included conduct unbecoming a judicial officer and behavior that undermined public confidence in the integrity of the judicial system. The evidence presented included detailed documentation of his participation in systematic emotional abuse directed at a vulnerable family member during pregnancy loss recovery, testimony from multiple witnesses, and expert analysis connecting his personal behavior to unfitness for judicial office. The investigation had moved with remarkable speed once Marcus's research revealed the full scope of the Collins family's financial irregularities and ethical violations. Judge Collins had been using his position to influence business deals for family members, creating conflicts of interest that violated multiple judicial ethics standards. Patricia's charitable foundation had been misappropriating donor funds for personal expenses, while Amanda's MBA credentials had been obtained through academic fraud that her family's connections had helped conceal. David's law firm was facing sanctions for client trust account violations that had been covered up through his father's judicial influence. The media coverage had been relentless and devastating. Jennifer Hayes from Channel 7 News had broken the initial story about judicial misconduct, leading to a cascade of investigative reports that exposed every aspect of the Collins family's corruption and abuse. The Denver Post had published a series of articles documenting their systematic targeting of vulnerable individuals, including detailed accounts from other victims who had come forward after seeing my story. Social media campaigns had amplified the coverage, ensuring that their behavior became a cautionary tale about privilege, abuse, and the importance of accountability for public officials. Patricia Collins sat in the front row of the courtroom, her perfectly styled appearance unable to disguise the devastation that had consumed her social standing over the past months. The charitable organizations that had once competed for her involvement had quietly removed her from leadership positions and donor recognition programs. Her name had been stripped from hospital wings and cultural center plaques, erasing decades of carefully constructed philanthropic legacy. The society friends who had once sought her approval now crossed streets to avoid uncomfortable encounters with someone whose reputation had become toxic in Denver's social circles. Amanda Collins had fared even worse. Her career prospects destroyed by revelations about her academic fraud and her systematic cruelty toward vulnerable individuals. The Colorado business community had closed ranks against her, with former classmates and professional contacts distancing themselves from someone whose behavior had become a liability for any organization or relationship. Her engagement to a prominent Denver attorney had been terminated when his law firm demanded he choose between his professional future and his association with the Collins family scandal. David sat alone at the defendant's table, his law license suspended pending the outcome of multiple disciplinary proceedings. Henderson Miller and Associates had terminated his partnership after client complaints and trust account irregularities threatened the firm's professional standing and malpractice insurance coverage. Our divorce proceedings had resulted in a settlement that awarded me significant assets while exposing additional financial misconduct that triggered federal tax investigations. He'd lost not only his wife and career, but also the family relationships that had once defined his identity, as his relatives faced their own legal and professional consequences. The systematic destruction of their lives had been accomplished through meticulous documentation and strategic coordination across multiple jurisdictions and professional bodies. The Colorado State Bar Association had pursued disciplinary action against 3 family members who held law licenses. The Internal Revenue Service had initiated comprehensive audits that revealed years of tax evasion and charitable fraud. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had opened criminal investigations into judicial corruption and organized financial misconduct that could result in federal charges carrying decades of prison time. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had provided expert testimony about the psychological impact of systematic emotional abuse during pregnancy loss recovery, establishing medical evidence that connected their behavior to serious mental health consequences requiring ongoing treatment. Her professional analysis had been crucial for demonstrating that their actions constituted deliberate infliction of emotional distress, rather than mere family dysfunction or social awkwardness. The medical documentation had also supported workers' compensation claims related to stress-induced health problems that prevented me from maintaining normal work activities. Rebecca Thompson's investigative report had uncovered a network of corruption extending far beyond the Collins family's immediate circle, revealing systematic abuse of judicial and professional positions that had enriched their associates while depriving legitimate victims of legal protection and financial compensation. Her findings had prompted multiple federal investigations and legislative hearings about judicial accountability and professional oversight that would reshape Colorado's legal and political landscape for years to come. The comprehensive intelligence profiles that Marcus had developed revealed patterns of behavior extending back decades, documenting systematic exploitation of vulnerable individuals who had been unable to resist or expose their abuse due to social isolation, financial dependence, or professional intimidation. The Collins family had built their wealth and status through calculated cruelty directed at people who lacked the resources or expertise necessary to fight back effectively. Their mistake had been targeting someone whose professional capabilities and personal resilience exceeded their ability to contain or manage the consequences. Jennifer Martinez had negotiated a divorce settlement that not only provided significant financial compensation, but also included provisions requiring David to participate in psychological counseling and community service related to domestic violence prevention. The settlement agreement had been structured to ensure ongoing accountability while providing resources for establishing my independent life and career advancement. The financial recovery had exceeded my most optimistic projections, providing security that would allow me to pursue professional opportunities without concern about economic stability. Standing in that courtroom, listening to Judge Collins receive formal censure that would end his judicial career and potentially lead to criminal prosecution, I felt the complex satisfaction that comes from seeing justice served through systematic effort and strategic planning. The grief from my miscarriage remained real and painful, but it was no longer compounded by the secondary trauma of family abuse and social isolation. The Collins family's cruelty had been exposed and punished through appropriate legal and professional channels, ensuring that other vulnerable individuals would be protected from similar exploitation. The transformation from victim to victor had required months of intensive effort and significant financial investment, but the results exceeded every goal I had established during those first dark days after their dinner party mockery. The woman who had been crushed by pregnancy loss and family betrayal had become someone capable of comprehensive strategic thinking and effective implementation of complex justice campaigns. The professional skills that had built my marketing career had proven equally valuable for reputation, destruction, and accountability enforcement, when applied with sufficient motivation and resources. The miscarriage support group I continued attending had become a forum for sharing strategies about protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation during medical crises. My story had inspired other women to document inappropriate family behavior and seek professional assistance when grief was met with cruelty rather than compassion. The network of survivors and advocates that emerged from our shared experiences was creating systemic changes in how institutions responded to pregnancy loss and family abuse, ensuring that my personal trauma would contribute to broader social progress. Dr. Rachel Kim had documented remarkable improvement in my physical and mental health following the resolution of family stress and the achievement of justice through legal proceedings. The anxiety and depression that had characterized my immediate post-miscarriage period had been replaced by renewed energy and sense of purpose that reflected successful trauma resolution through empowerment, rather than merely symptom management. The medical evidence supported theories about the importance of agency and justice for healing from interpersonal trauma and loss. Morrison & Associates had offered me a promotion to senior partner based on my demonstrated expertise in crisis management and reputation analysis. Recognizing that my personal experience had enhanced my professional capabilities in ways that would benefit our clients facing similar challenges. The firm's leadership understood that someone who had successfully navigated complex multi-jurisdictional legal campaigns while managing personal trauma possessed unique insights valuable for protecting other individuals and organizations from reputation damage and professional misconduct. The broader Denver legal community had implemented new ethics training requirements and judicial oversight procedures designed to prevent future abuse of power and position by individuals who had previously operated without effective accountability or consequences. The reforms included mandatory reporting systems for inappropriate behavior by legal professionals and enhanced investigation procedures for complaints against judicial officers. The Collins family scandal had become a catalyst for institutional changes that would protect future victims from similar exploitation. 3 years later, I remarried a fellow attorney who understood the importance of family loyalty and mutual protection during difficult times. Our relationship was built on genuine respect and shared values rather than social convenience and family pressure. When I became pregnant again, my new husband's family provided the kind of support and celebration that I had never experienced with the Collins clan. The successful pregnancy and birth of our daughter represented not just personal healing, but also proof that the future could be rebuilt on foundations stronger than those destroyed by cruelty and betrayal. The Collins family members, who had once wielded significant power and influence in Denver's legal and social circles, now struggled with professional exile and social isolation that would define the remainder of their lives. Judge Collins faced federal criminal charges that would likely result in prison time. Patricia's financial assets had been frozen pending resolution of fraud investigations that threatened her remaining wealth and property. Amanda worked in a series of low-level positions that represented the only employment available to someone whose professional reputation had been permanently destroyed by documented cruelty and academic dishonesty. David had attempted reconciliation multiple times, sending letters and making phone calls that revealed his ongoing inability to understand the fundamental character defects that had enabled his family's abuse. His communications consistently focused on forgiveness and moving forward, rather than acknowledgement of responsibility and commitment to genuine change. The restraining order I had obtained prevented direct contact, but mutual acquaintances reported that he remained convinced that our marriage had been destroyed by misunderstandings rather than his deliberate choice to prioritize family loyalty over spousal protection. The dinner party where they had mocked my miscarriage had marked the end of their comfortable assumption that vulnerability would be met with impunity, and that grief could be exploited for entertainment without consequences. Their cruel laughter that evening had awakened strategic capabilities they never could have anticipated in someone they had dismissed as too weak to threaten their carefully constructed lives. The woman they had tried to break had instead become the architect of their comprehensive destruction, proving that underestimating others' resilience and capabilities could be the most expensive mistake anyone could make. The story of how a grieving woman had systematically dismantled a powerful family's corrupt empire became a case study in law schools and business programs throughout Colorado, illustrating the importance of ethical behavior and the potential consequences of exploiting vulnerable individuals. My experience had demonstrated that even the most powerful people could be held accountable for their actions when sufficient evidence was gathered and appropriate legal channels were pursued with professional expertise and determination. Looking back on that devastating dinner party and the months of strategic planning that followed, I understood that the Collins family had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible: absolute clarity about their true character and the motivation necessary to transform personal trauma into systematic justice. Their mockery of my miscarriage had revealed not just their cruelty but also their vulnerability to someone with the professional skills and personal determination necessary to expose their corruption and ensure appropriate consequences. The baby I had lost would always remain in my heart, but the Collins family's cruel response to that loss had ultimately led to protection for countless other vulnerable individuals who would never face similar exploitation because of the accountability systems and legal precedents that emerged from their downfall. Their greatest act of cruelty had become the foundation for their own destruction and the catalyst for institutional changes that would prevent future abuse of power and position by those who believed their status made them immune to consequences. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.